Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church. And today we're still in Second Corinthians. We're going to be in Second Corinthians 8, verses 1 through 15. And today it's Paul's call to a generous giving for the Corinthian church here. And we're going to look through that and go through that real quick. The one thing I will say, because sometimes I know around giving and things like that, it can be a touchy subject. And I hope that I like this section that Paul gives on giving, because I think it's a good call for how we should be giving as the church compared to sometimes how giving in the church is kind of suggested or told it should be. And I think this is a good example. So we'll read this and then go through the notes and talk about it a little bit. 2 Corinthians 8, 1 through 15. He says, "Now I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, what God in his kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia. They are being tested by many troubles, and they are very poor, but they are also filled with abundant joy, which has overflowed in rich generosity. For I can testify that they gave not only what they could afford, but far more, and they did it of their own free will. They begged us again and again for the privilege of sharing in the gift for the believers in Jerusalem. They even did more than we had hoped, for their first action was to give themselves to the Lord and to us, just as God wanted them to do. So we have urged Titus, who encouraged your giving in the first place, to return to you and encourage you to finish this ministry of giving. Since you excel in so many ways, in your faith, your gifted speakers, your knowledge, and your enthusiasm, and your love from us, I want you to excel also in a gracious act of giving. I am not commanding you to do this, but I am testing how genuine your love is by comparing it with the eagerness of the other churches. You know the generous grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, though he was rich, yet for our sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty he could make you rich. Here is my advice. It would be good for you to finish what you started a year ago. Last year you were the first who wanted to give, and you were the first to begin doing it. Now you should finish what you started. Let the eagerness you showed in the beginning be matched now by your giving. Give in proportion to what you have. Whatever you give is acceptable if you give it eagerly. And this is an important section right through here, and we'll come back to this. And give according to what you have, not what you don't have. Of course, I don't mean your giving should make life easy for others and hard for yourself. I only mean that there should be some equality. Right now, you have plenty and can help those who are in need. Later, they will have plenty and can share with you when you need it. In this way, things will be equal. As the scriptures say, those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered only a little had enough. And so, Paul now here is turning his attention to the collection of Jerusalem that he kind of talked about in First Corinthians, right? This relief fund was intended to aid the poverty-stricken saints in the holy city of Jerusalem. And Paul had earlier given instructions about this matter. We read that in First Corinthians 16 when we went through that. And now it's time. This is something they started, and so now it's time to collect those funds. And so Paul hoped, his hope behind this was that the gift from the Gentiles, excuse me, still got a little bit of this congestion and cough left, that the Gentile congregations to the Jewish church would kind of cement that relationship a little bit between the two groups, because there was a little bit of, um, issues there and things that they were still working out. And so he was hoping that this would help bring them closer together. And so Titus was going to start taking up the collection when he returned to Corinth carrying this letter from Paul. And so in 8:7, right, Paul, this is a key verse in Paul's exposition on church giving, right? The Corinthians had a reputation for spiritual gifts. They were known for their spiritual gifts. Now they must be the leaders. They were the leaders in spiritual gifts. Now they must be leaders in gracious act of giving. And honestly, one of the spiritual gifts is giving. Which to me is a true hallmark of spirituality. And so God had been lavish in his goodness to the Corinthians, and so they should be generous to the Jewish believers in need. And that's what Paul calls them to. And this would be recognized as a sign of unity in Christ. And so he lets them know that it's not a command, right? Giving to the Lord's work must be voluntary, not compelled. Too often, I see a lot of times in churches where giving is almost, well, I mean, shoot, I've seen some examples of where they've had you turn in your income statement and basically forced you to give 10%, right? Excuse me. And so that's not true giving. right? The church is forcing you to do something like this, then that's not true giving. And so giving is from the heart. And when it's voluntary, it brings much blessings. And so Paul's saying here, now we are commanded to give, right? That's not a misnomer. But what he's saying here, the way he was talking about this was like, I'm not commanding you to make sure you do this fully. He's just saying, look, you need to finish what you started. And so we are to give, and we're to give generously, right? And so the idea, the model for that is for the model for generous giving is the Lord himself. Like Paul calls it out. He said, like, look, Jesus was rich in the Father's presence, but he became extremely poor compared to heaven, right? By accepting human existence and death on a cross. And so by that sacrificial giving, right, or that self-giving sacrifice of Jesus, he can make people rich with the blessing of salvation. And so Paul uses that as an example of saying, look, we've been richly blessed in many ways, spiritually. To the Corinthians, that was a rich community. They were a rich people, or richer people. Let me put it that way. And so he's saying, you've been blessed this way. Give, right? And so what he tells them, say, you started this a year ago, right? And so we see this since he states that you started this a year ago. We know that this letter was at least a year old, or it'd been at least a year since he wrote First Corinthians. And Paul tells people to give according to what a person has. And I like this, right? Paul did not pressure people to give what they did not have or could not afford to give. He tells them, like, you look back through these verses here, right? He says, of course, I don't mean your giving should make life easy for others and hard for yourself. He's like, don't put yourself in the poorhouse to try to give. He says, I do feel, and personally, I feel there should be a sacrificial element to giving, meaning, okay, I'm going to give up something in order to give to God, and but it shouldn't be like, oh well, I'm not going to be able to eat this week in order to give. I don't think that, and I've seen people and certain preachers in some churches try to use that as an example of, well, if you sacrifice this way for the church, then you God's going to bless you. I'm not going to say if you give, God's not going to bless you, but God, nowhere does the God or anyone expect us to give to the point to where we can't hardly make it. That's not. He's saying, give from the heart, give from what you have, right? Give what you can, right? And I do think there should be a sacrificial side to that, meaning in the sense of, hey, I may not be able to get this one thing that I like, or be able to do something that I like, something like that, but don't put yourself in the poorhouse. I hope that makes sense, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get at there with this, right? Also, right, Paul was not asking all Christians to share their possessions equally. This wasn't everyone should be equal, everyone should be the same. Because he didn't ask the Corinthians, the wealthy Corinthians, to give to the poor Macedonia. This was just for Jerusalem. And so what he simply asked Corinthians to do is to do their fair share in meeting the extreme needs of the Christians in Jerusalem. That's what it was called to. And so at the present time, right, the Gentile believers can contribute financially, while the Jerusalem believers contribute spiritually. They were a little bit more spiritually mature with their leadership in the ministry of the gospel. And so what Paul's basically saying here, hey, there's going to be a time where you're going to be in need, and someone else is going to be able to give to you. And then that was the kind of idea. You give now while you can, out of your, what you can give, and then later on, the churches will be able to help you when you're in need, and vice versa. It goes around. And that's what Paul's calling them to. That's the equality that he calls to. It all kinds of comes out. It all becomes equal in the end. And so that's what he was calling them to. And I think this is the kind of giving that we're called to give, right? Like I said, I think there should be a sacrificial element to it, right? And some people, they still tithe and go by that 10%. We're not commanded to do that. I think 10% is a good starting point. I've always said that, but I think if you can give more, you should. Again, give according to what you have. And I also think, one of the things we should do when planning our giving, that should be one of the first things we plan for, right? Like, okay, I'm going to give, and here's the other thing I'll say, and as a preacher, and so this may sound, kind of out of sorts a little bit from what you may have heard, but it doesn't necessarily have to be just to the church or the church you're going to. I do think you should give to the church that you're going to help support the funds, as long as they're being fiscally responsible, right, and doing the right things. you should help support that ministry. But also, there are other ways of giving, right? One of the things we like to do, and then this isn't to brag or something like that, but like if we go, when we go out and we eat out or something like that, we try to give generous tips to people, right? And one of the things we'll do is we have these little Jesus things, and we'll leave a note, or give a little bit extra, and leave one of the little Jesuses with them and stuff like that. And so we kind of give back, but there's other ways we give. Like we see someone in need, we're going to help them out and do stuff like that. And so your giving just isn't giving to the church, right? It's giving to others and helping others out as well. And so I hope this makes sense. I hope this is maybe a different view on giving than what maybe you've been called to before. But yeah, we're to give generously as we can. But it's not something that should be so hard on you that you're sitting here going into the poorhouse while trying to support other people. That we're never called to do that, right? I don't ever see that anywhere, where we're called to be like that. And I think Paul explains that perfectly. So hopefully that makes sense. As always, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch these. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, I ask that you do that. That way you get these daily, get the updates daily, and can see those. So as always, more than anything, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch, and I hope y'all have a wonderful day.